Yo everybody, this is the TezMechnator's gaming franchise retrospective and history, and today we're covering Metal Gear Solid. In the gaming industry, Metal Gear Solid is one of the most famous gaming brands in the entire world. It has provided a lot of games on multiple platforms such as the PlayStation, the Xbox and the Nintendo Entertainment System. In addition to this, the brand itself has sold multiple units of merchandise, two-parter stories, comics, and set new standards for postmodern stories like Metal Gear Solid 2. To explain how it became successful, I need to go through the history.
Snake.
So we need to get the TARDIS back to the early 80s where Hideo Kojima was a teenager, and he was well known for playing video games while in his leisure time. The most interesting thing about Hideo Kojima is that he originally wanted to become an artist or an illustrator, but he eventually wrote short stories for major Japanese magazines. However though, Hideo Kojima was well known for writing 400 pages worth of content. As the maximum amount of pages allowed on the short stories was 100, his books were never published. Therefore he shifted his focus to another hobby, which was filmmaking, and he used to produce short clips with his friends. At the last year of his college, he decided to change industry from film to gaming, and he really wanted to become a gaming director. Therefore he searched for employment and he found it with Konami. He was employed as a planner and a designer for the MXX division in Konami. His employment with Konami actually was on a bumpy road. His every idea, including the gaming ones, was overlooked by the executives. He almost quit as a result of this, but he stayed on. Being determined to stay with the company paid off because he became the assistant director for the Antarctic Adventure, and he actually developed his first game, which was the Lost Warld. However though, there was another bump on the road because the game was ultimately cancelled by the executives, which resulted in Hideo being insulted by other developers. They even say, quote unquote, "Please release the game before you actually die." To prove them wrong, he pitched a game called Metal Gear 1 that was going to be released on the MSX2 computer systems, and due to its limited hardware, Hideo Kojima pitched an idea that the enemy should be avoided rather than attacked. Although initially the producer rejected the game, one of the bosses or the executives approved of the game and encouraged the others to bring it forward. As a result, Metal Gear 1 was released in 1987 on the MXS2 computer system, and it was ported onto the Nintendo Entertainment System. And here's an interesting fact for you. The character that you play as, Solid Snake, was based on Carl Reese, who was the antagonist in Terminator. As it's a stealth based game, the player is then presented with a situation where the player cannot be detected by enemies, surveillance cameras and so on. To allow the player to achieve this and making the game not too challenging, a radio transceiver is actually given to the player at the beginning of the game, but later on in the franchise though, it will be known as a codec. The purpose of this transceiver is to allow you to get help, advice and some instructions from Big Boss and other specialists. At the first game though, it's mainly about where you are. For example, Big Boss will contact you to warn you about the surveillance cameras, which I do actually enjoy because in Metal Gear Solid 2 they bring it too far, but more on that later. There's also other things that can assist you like rations, weapons. Particularly with weapons, you can use them to make shortcuts, destroy hollow walls, and make sure that the enemies are killed. And they were very, very useful for boss fights. There is the equipment that can help you to progress through outer heaven, like your keycards, rations, gas masks, you name it all. With all that covered, let's talk about the controls. Solid Snake is able to move vertically and horizontally on a line. As he is stranded without any weapons available, there are some combat maneuvers that can assist the player with the game. And there are some opportunities for Solid Snake to swim undercover in order to prevent himself from being seen by sentries. And that's pretty much all. Oh yeah, I forgot. There's one more thing that everybody needs to be aware of, is the alert system. When Solid Snake is on the sight of an enemy, one exclamation mark comes up, which means that all the enemies within the area attacks him. But if all the enemies have two exclamation marks, guess what? The entire base goes on alert. And as for a game that is stealth, this feature alone makes this game very successful at what it does, a stealth based game. And with everything pretty much covered, there's only one thing to cover, it's the plot. As I already mentioned, that Solid Snake is the main character of the game and he's been supported by Big Boss. His main mission objective is to save Grey Fox and Dr Madnar from outer heaven. In order to achieve this, you need to avoid being detected at all times, rescue the POWs, who are the hostages, and destroy all the bosses, and here's a lot of them. Here are the names for all of them: Shotmaker, Machine Gun Kid, Fire Trooper, Bloody Brad, and Dirty Duck.
Shoot the duck! Shoot the duck!
God, that's the lamest name for a character. But anywho, the character approaches where the Metal Gear TX55 is and destroys it. Or in the Nintendo Entertainment System version of it, it's the computer that controls it. Which is good news for the Resistance team at Outer Heaven, but with Hideo Kojima's storytelling, which is really good, there's a plot twist and Big Boss turns out to be the villain. Solid Snake manages to destroy Big Boss by using the rockets and then escape from the facility by using the ladders. Without an explanation, a big explosion occurs. Metal Gear 1 was an instant success in the Western markets, but had very bad sales in Japan for the MX2 version of it. Therefore, Hideo Kojima never planned to create a sequel for it. However though, the producer of the time, Konami, intended to create a sequel known as Snake's Revenge, which came out in 1990 in the Western market. The reason why this was produced is because there was a lot of features that were missing in the first Metal Gear in the Nintendo Entertainment System version of it, and they were brought it into this game. The story goes that in the Middle East there's been an uproar about a new Metal Gear being in the hands of these terrorists, and it turns out to be Big Boss, who is the villain, and he is a cyborg, and he wants to get some revenge on Solid Snake, but it ultimately fails, and they have this peace day.
Time paradox.
God, just imagine it was the sequel. The Metal Gear franchise wouldn't be the same as it is. What I'm going to do now is talk about the development of Metal Gear 2. The development of the game actually started on a train near Tokyo. Hideo Kojima talked to one of the developers at Snake Revenge, and he actually came out of story, and he was very determined to create the sequel. Before he created this sequel, he had to produce another game called Snatcher, which was critically acclaimed. In 1990, the Japanese market saw a rise of Metal Gear 2 on the MSX2 console and the Nintendo Entertainment System. This game in particular was the basic structure of the future of the Metal Gear franchise. It had more emphasis on stealth, which means that all the enemies had hearing sensors and can look around 45 degrees. And when you're in the field of sight, guess what? All the alerts come on, and this is the basic principles of the actual system. The top category is alert. This means all the forces are on full alert and they are searching for you all the way through the facility, and they will attempt to kill you. Whereas in invasion, if they lost your trail, you have to go hiding, and suddenly the counter will go down, which means it goes back to normal. On the top right part of the screen, there's a radar that gives you all the indications where the enemies are and your destination. White dots represent the enemies, whilst the red dots represent Snake. Another great feature that was modified was the codec. Now you can get information about the current situation and great tips on new movies. And talking about them, there are also new ones to balance the level of difficulty. Unlike Metal Gear 1, Solid Snake is now able to crawl under fans into ventilation in order to find shortcuts, and it's a very useful feature called the kneeling, where you become very silent, therefore it won't attract the enemies. The last thing that I admire this game for is the puzzles that need to be completed. It brings more of action and adventure type of feel, and it makes the game feel very different. As I mentioned before, the game is more plot heavy, and this is the actual story itself. The Cold War's ended, and Dr. Kojima has produced a new algae called Oryx, but Zanzibar has gained control of this oil and Dr. Marth himself. With the world in crisis, Foxhound had to find a new recruitment to solve the problem out. As it turns out, it was a former soldier known as Solid Snake who saved the world from Outer Heaven. And unlike last time, Snake is actually accompanied by a team of Foxhound specialists. What happens here is that while they're going through an underwater insertion, they use a parachute, and he goes into the entering point where the mission starts. And here's the schematics of the actual Zanzibar land itself. As you can see, there's one big fortress in the middle, and there's some fortresses on the opposite side as well. And what happens here is that he gets contact with Foxhound and the specialist teams, and he has to save Holly White, whose cover's been broken, and he has to go to the main fortress. Unfortunately, whilst doing that, he encounters Black Ninja and One Man. Black Ninja turns out to be Carl, who's Jennifer's brother, the Resistance team leader, and he reveals that Big Boss is still alive. The plot then intensifies when Snake turns the frequency for Master Miller upside down, and it turns out to be Dr. Madnar, who's captured again. In the main complex itself, he encounters a SDB agent known as Christopher Hovner, and they try to contact Dr. Marv, but he couldn't speak a word of English, therefore the only way to get to him is to get to him face to face. With that being said, they head towards the sewers and the prison to save Dr. Madnar, but as it turns out, as they cross the bridge, the SDB agent is seriously wounded and they kidnap Dr. Madnar again. and the perpetrator for this is no other than Grey Fox, and he escaped. Now determined to stop Grey Fox and Big Boss more than ever, he approaches to the northern part of the island where Metal Gear D is. Before he can do that though, he encounters the Four Horsemen and other elite groups. Snake infiltrates the facility and finds that Dr. Muff has been tortured beyond repair and he is killed. As it turns out that Dr. Madnar is no innocent party in this, because he turns out to be a traitor who is responsible for voluntarily creating the new Metal Gear, and there's been an outright conclusion that Solid Snake slaughters him like a bitch. And this is where everything becomes a little bit more interesting. The grand finale starts with a fight between Grey Fox and Solid Snake on the Metal Gear D. The battle concludes with Solid Snake's equipment being burnt to a crisp and Grey Fox escaping. The final battle between them is in a room where they're fighting with bare knuckles, and Solid Snake prevails over him. With that done, he encounters Big Boss again with no weapons. So what he has to do, he has to get key cards and destroy Big Boss by collecting a flamethrower and burning him alive. And he talks about Snake being locked in this loop where he has to fight forever, and he's ultimately destroyed. Goodbye! Solid Snake then encounters Holly White again, and they make their escape to the helicopter pad where they escape from Zanzibar land, and he makes his own way to Alaska into the wilderness. With that all being said, Metal Gear 2 is a fantastic game. It contains a lot of elements from the Metal Gear Solid franchise, and it will be considered one of the best ones there are. And believe it or not, it was one of the most anticipated games in the Western market because it was never released in 1990 in Europe or North America. For a game that came out with the 8-bit era, it came up with fantastic bosses. I particularly enjoyed One In Man because you had to use E-Speed against him by placing the mines underneath him. My last point for this program is the music. Both games have very, I think, excellent music in my opinion. It brings out the intensity and the fear into the player. Just listen to this. I think pretty much all of you have figured out that the next video will consist of Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2. And for the third part though, I have to bring in Metal Gear Solid 3 and the Patriots. Yes, I'm doing a subsection about the Patriots. And on the last note, I would have to say thank you for watching this broadcast and bring me some precious feedback so that I can improve this product. And please subscribe most of all. Kudos.